Hello listeners, and welcome to the Montel Weekly Podcast, bringing you energy matters in an informal setting. As the war in the Ukraine intensifies and enters its second week, prices of gas and coal have soared amid growing concerns for supply. In today's pod, we turn our attention to the reasons behind the price moves and the outlook for the coming months and next winter. With Russia meeting 40% of Europe's gas demand and up to 70% of its coal needs, will companies on the continent be able to find other sources? What are the alternatives? Helping me, Richard Sverrisson, to discuss the hard choices firms face going forward are Wayne Bryan of London Stock Exchange Group and Laurence Walker, editor Montel. A warm welcome to you guys.
Hello.
Good afternoon, Richard. How you doing?
Well, all good. I think we could and should start by looking at the price moves this week, Wayne. I mean, what's going on? What kind of levels have we seen and why?
The price levels we've seen have been incredible. We started off yesterday, we saw the biggest one-day rise ever recorded in terms of numbers on the TTF day ahead and the MBP day ahead. I think MBP went up 110 pence per therm in one day, which is staggering. And the TTF was up, I think, about 65 euros yesterday. Front month as well. Interestingly, we traded just above the high from December on the front month contracts. And it kind of highlights the fear that's now gripping these markets once more. And we're now in uncharted territory when it comes to prices. I see today there's a little bit of softness on the day ahead markets, but the prompt markets are still trading higher. And one thing to be aware of is the actual spread between summer and winter. Once more, summer's trading at a significant premium to the winter contract, which highlights further the risk that we're seeing at the moment. And I think today the spread's actually increased. It's now 16.6 euros. And this has never been observed before. It's always, normally winter trades at a premium to attract, to incentivize storage. But now we're seeing, 16 euros. It's incredible. But it kind of highlights where the fear is, immediate short-term supply fears are dominating. Of course, the summer season starts 1st of April, so we've only got literally a month left and we're into the summer. So I think that contract's going to retain some of its risk premiums unless we see, sort of a de-escalation in Ukraine.
We're recording on Thursday afternoon, listeners, so, we can judge the week's price movements so far. But, Wayne, but at the same time, flows from Russia haven't stopped, have they?
No, actually, and strangely, for some anyway, when I tried to explain it to someone, actually Russian flows have actually increased via Velki Capuchane, and we've seen some flows via Malno, especially in the sort of last 2 days. I think between sort of 9 o'clock and 5 p.m, we've seen, 5 a.m, towards the end of the gas day, we've seen really strong flows from Malno. I think we hit about mid 400s last night, late last night. So we've seen some within day booking. Now, what this is obviously a sign of, as well as Velki as well, it's up to 880, I think, today. What that is a sign of is, if you think about those who hold long-term Russian contracts previously, so just before the actual invasion started, we saw most of these buyers taking it from the spot because the spot was cheaper than the TTF front month index. TTF front month index is generally the calculation of how you work out the price of Russian long-term contracts. So when we saw that the wholesale price below the TTF front month index, of course, you nominate on the spot. Once they actually crossed into Ukrainian soil outside of the Donbass and started the invasion last Thursday night, Friday morning, since then, we've seen Russian gas flows via Velki ramp up significantly by about 500 gigawatt hours per day. So what that is telling you is, or not telling you, we already know that the front month March index for flows now is around the 80 euros mark, I think it expired at. Where look at the wholesale market, as we know, it's significantly higher than this price. So this is why we're seeing a continuation of stronger flows coming from end user high nominations. Gazprom actually come out and sort of confirm that recently over the last few days. So this is why we're seeing it. I mean, it's, due to the invasion, risk goes up on the near curve, absolutely makes the front month index now the way to go. And I think this is responsible for what we've seen on Malno as well. So,
And do you expect that then to continue in the coming weeks?
While the price stays above the index, yes. And of course, if there's no other sort of external influences or disruptions, then we do forecast this Russian flows to remain elevated due to current price dynamics.
Because there's some talk of a cut to flows and Europe actually forcing flows to stop. But is that something that you envisage or that you see happening anytime soon?
Same question. It was asked to me yesterday. And I think we'd be very remiss to do that. We all know that, fair enough, we might have some gas in storage, but how long would that last? And Europe would sort of grind to a halt without these additional Russian flows. I mean, if you think about it, even if it was just stopping the flows through Ukraine, we can't replace that gas. You can't replace that straight away now. I can hear the long-term pitch talking about weaning ourselves off Russian gas, etc. But in the short term, we're wholly reliant on Russian gas. And if anyone thinks otherwise, then I'd like to know where this additional gas would come from if we cut the flows. Conversely, though, I've also been asked, could Russia do it? Now, this situation, as we know, is really, really escalating down the wrong track, to be fair. So you could see if sanctions intensify even more against Russia, and they're already very steep. And as we spoke about earlier, even Gazprom got kicked out of their London offices, which shows the sort of, say, resentment's probably the wrong word to use, the feeling towards Russia at the moment. There's been a lot of things happening on that front. So it could be a case of, okay, you're going to keep doing this to us, like the ruble, as we know, is at record lows. Perhaps there could be a sort of temporary disruption for a couple of days, and even a couple of days of no Russian gas coming into Europe would see today's price look extremely cheap. So it's before we said it was impossible. We didn't think as a team that this would happen. But now, even in our recent meetings, we've been saying, you know what, there's nothing off the table at the moment. We still think it's highly unlikely based on Gazprom's recent comments around, they've always said reliable supplier. And of course, when you look back to previous times of conflict, Russian gas flows always continue to flow reliably. So, but as we know, the way this situation is developing, I think, you can't take nothing off the table, and it really would put a jolt to European gas prices.
Yeah, and it's quite a scary thought, like you said here, that just stopping it, if Russia were to adopt a kind of tit for tat approach and enforce those kind of sanctions, then today's prices would be cheap. I mean, that's quite a scary thought. But if I can turn to you, Laurie, and we've also seen some dramatic price increases in coal this week, haven't we? Can you talk us through some of those?
Yes, certainly. I mean, as Wayne said about sort of uncharted territory for the gas, we're obviously well into uncharted territory for coal as well. I think the difference lies to some extent in the fact that we have seen some disruptions for coal. We've seen some delays. We've seen constraints. We're hearing of force majeure being declared, as we had from SUEK, which is Russia's biggest producer, and still sort of awaiting some of the details, but certainly these sort of things are going to spark a lot of concern in the market. Even prior to the issues, even prior to the invasion, there were constraints to Russian exports, and Russia is, as you mentioned at the beginning, is sort of primary supplier to Europe. So without Russia, it's pretty tough. I think the shipping side of things is part of the issue. Certainly from a sort of on the ground basis, if we're talking about what's been directly impacted by the military actions, we're seeing issues in the Black Sea. So a few ships were damaged last week by shells, by certainly involved in the conflict. This has made some of the shippers not want to go there. So we're seeing far fewer cargoes coming out of that area. Then we're seeing some shipping companies just refusing to work with Russia. So we've seen this so far seems to have been more for the container segment, but it's very, very likely it would turn to bulk commodities soon as well, to liquid bulks. And then just the fact that some of these shippers don't want to bring coal out of Russia because they're afraid there will be bans, such as we've seen in the UK, on vessels entering ports. Again, obviously with the UK so far, it seems to be affecting the flag of the ship rather than the actual cargo, but things are moving so quickly at the moment, it could affect anything. I think amid this and amid the fact that globally now people are trying to find an alternative to Russian coal, which even before this crisis would have been hard. It's now borderline impossible, but obviously unless you pay these astronomical prices, and people are, we've seen deals at over 400 for Australian coal, for South African coal.
$400 per ton. Yeah.
Per ton, yes. Yeah. And
Crazy,
this is free on board. This is without even shipping. This is, buying from the port. So yes, it's certainly uncharted territory.
Contrary to what Wayne was saying about gas, we're still very high prices, the military operations, but the gas is flowing. Whereas the coal there seems to be an issue here, and supplies, people don't want to either supply it or to have it enter ports. I mean, what are the implications of that, for example, for coal generators or coal generators of coal-fired power in Northern Europe?
Well, it's going to be a difficult one, and there's no quick fix. You can't just suddenly say, okay, we're not going to take any more Russian coal. I mean, well, you can, but it's going to cause problems. It's going to keep prices hugely elevated. I mean, I've seen a few things just in the shipping data. You can see, I mean, there seemed to be a vessel leaving South Africa for Germany, and it's the first one we've seen for a very, very long time. This left on Saturday. There's going to be more such moves. Spoken with American exporters who've said they've placed a few cargoes in the past few days. So there are alternatives there, but you can only wonder at what people are having to pay for that, and are they prepared to cover all of their requirements with non-Russian coal? If they are, it's going to cost them dearly.
Yeah, it's going to cost the earth, quite literally. And so, Wayne, you mentioned that there was no alternative to Russian gas, really, unless we see skyrocketing prices. But there is talk of, LNG from the US, from Qataris, from piped from North Africa. How realistic is that as an alternative to what we're getting so far?
In the long term, yes, it's definitely a distinct possibility for that to happen. But in the short term, firstly, you've got to realise in terms of LNG, most of the terminals in Northwest Europe are at full utilisation rate. So you can bring more cargoes, but the speed they can send it out and the capacity means we've got some limitations on that side of it. In terms of replacements from other sources, yes, that's potential. But I think what comes through Ukraine, look at the contracts, 40 BCM. Perhaps you could get another 10, 20 BCM rerouted via other means. But again, logistical problems. So you're still not going to replace that, that additional, say, 20 to 25 BCM immediately. It's something like you mentioned, they're talking about mandatory storage requirements, like in Germany, for example. There's talk of collective purchasing, all these sort of things. Again, yes, possible. Germany's talking about, extending or bringing back some more coal and nuclear into the mix to wean the reliance off Russian gas. So there's a lot of initiatives and a lot of great things being discussed. But in the short term, there's no possible way to replace all of that volume.
Hence the prices for the summer contracts, as you mentioned, Wayne, of course. And
like today, they're up again today.
Yeah, and you can't build an LNG terminal in a matter of weeks. That's the other thing, exactly, isn't it? That's the crucial element here. But do you see, this happening, like talk of a strategic reserve, of mandatory storage percentages? Do you see that happening on a pan-European basis? Do you think would that work? Or
I think to do it on a collective basis would prove difficult. I think each individual country has its own makeup of its, energy system, so to speak, and different levels of storage, all these sort of things. So I don't see how you can mandatory. I think recommendations, perhaps, percentage of your storage capacity should be at this level by certain dates. Of course, we already see that in Italy. But I think to have an EU-wide or a Northwest Europe-wide mandate is going to be quite hard to put into place. Like the purchasing, I saw something about collective wholesale purchasing. Who makes that decision? Who decides when to buy this huge tranche of gas? That for me is pie in the sky. I think other initiatives and what we talked about are the ones that to make positive steps if we are serious. I mean, there's obviously Nord Stream 2 now looks. I mean, we all thought it would be online towards the end of the year. Obviously, the certification process has been halted due to obvious reasons. But will it resume? I mean, there's a lot of resentment now, and this has really stoked up some feelings that we haven't seen before. And even probably some of the most staunch supporters of Nord Stream 2 in Germany might be wavering. And that, to me, is a fear as well. As well as there was even talk of saying, let's shut down Nord Stream 1. I mean, that, again, due to the over-reliance, is impossible in the short term. But long term, again, who knows? I mean, this depth of feeling, as I mentioned earlier, it seems to be running very deep, not just in our industry, but across many industries. Apple, Nike, all the social media giants, they're all moving out. So it could be left to be a bit of a pariah state. And that means who wants to deal with it? I mean, you've seen a lot of the investments from the big UK majors and US out of Russia, pulling, projects being cancelled, etc. So hence why I keep saying nothing is off the table at present.
But do you think there's any hope for Nord Stream 2 then, Wayne? I mean, from what we're hearing, you're talking of insolvency, the company firing staff in Switzerland. Is there any hope for the pipeline?
I mean, before I always said, we expect it online, Q4 this year. Now it's, for the first time, I'm doubting the project's completion, But again, it all depends on what happens over the coming, weeks, even months, in terms of how the situation in Ukraine develops. For the good or bad, I think will have a real effect on whether or not Nord Stream 2 does go ahead. But like I said, the feeling isn't great at the moment. And now I'm leaning towards not saying it won't happen because I don't want to put myself out like that, but the chances of it have started to increase, and we didn't think that would be the case.
And it gives the opponents of it, both in Germany and EU level, a perfect excuse, doesn't it? It gives them an exit strategy here to say no. But I'm also quite intrigued in that sense in companies dealing with Gazprom. We've seen a lot of announcements. If we pull out of we have no new investments in Russia or no new deals with Gazprom. But there's still quite a lot of money flowing to the company. I mean, I've seen figures of €1 billion a day to Gazprom. So I can't see, no new deals, but I haven't seen many companies saying we're cutting all ties.
Yeah, I think when you mentioned that number, I think it was around 2 billion since the start of the invasion in 7 days or 6 or 7 days. We spent 2 billion.
Europe or
$2 billion
Okay.
on Europe spent $2 billion on Russian gas. I mean, it's a lot of money. And again, do they still want to keep sending that money, towards Russia? I think it's helping finance a lot of things, despite their inability to access a lot of other financial means. They're obviously still getting paid for their gas because we saw the sanctions didn't really target payments for energy because of the impact, as we spoke about, it could have. So again, it's a situation I didn't think we'd be in, to be honest. Going back a week or two ago, I thought it was a lot of political posturing, and we didn't think the line would be crossed. And that's what we always said, that further incursions east would see this happen, but none of us really thought this would happen, to be honest.
If I go back to alternatives and alternative supplies, Wayne, do you see any possibility that, for example, that production at Groningen of the Netherlands could be, and the Dutch Groningen could be ramped up, or that, for example, Rough could be brought back, the storage in the North Sea? Any possibility that those things can happen?
The Groningen one's interesting. Again, I was asked that question yesterday, and I think the Dutch Prime Minister came out the other day and said he really doesn't envisage that they'll want to use Groningen over the cap this year, even in the most extreme circumstance. He doesn't think it would happen. So that, to me, signals that they don't want to ramp up output. And we know about the tremors and the impact. I think it would need a serious crisis of security of supply for us to see Groningen ramp up. So, yeah, I mean, I was when I read that statement, I thought, okay, well, that doesn't bode well.
That puts paid to that, exactly.
Quite quickly. And in terms of Rough, that's technically probably not possible. Rough was shut down because it was an aging asset. And I think it needs to be redeveloped if it's to be used as a storage cavern. And I think technically as well, that would prove very difficult. So I don't think Rough could be brought back. And again, any new storage and LNG terminals, etc., you mentioned, it's not a quick fix. Yeah. It really isn't.
But a quick fix is bringing back mothballed coal plants, or some countries, some companies announcing plans to stop closing them, to extend their lifetimes. Is this something that you're seeing then, Laurie? But then the other question is, related to that, where's that coal going to come that's going to fire these plants?
Well, yes, I think the question is more about the supply than the actual generation capacity at the moment. Yes, I guess they could potentially. I haven't heard that things will specifically be extended as such. Obviously, there's talks about it in Germany. In the UK, we've got some more capacity coming offline, some more coal-fired capacity coming offline, I think, in September. So, yes, maybe at a stretch that would be extended. But then again, obviously the UK has said they're not obviously quite as dependent on Russia as maybe the rest of Europe. So, yeah, I'm not sure that is really going to be an answer, and I don't think that would really solve the problem anyway. If we are facing a prolonged absence of Russian coal, or at least restrictions against the use of or the import of Russian coal.
What's and what's the feeling in those countries, those that are most affected maybe by a shortfall in supply? Which are they? Are we talking Germany here? Are we talking the Netherlands? Which are the main areas that, should there be a problem of supply come in the coming months and seasons?
Well, yes, it's going to be the primary consumers. So, yes, Germany, Netherlands, possibly. Poland, even. They're looking at banning any coal coming into the country, and we're seeing reports yesterday of them even looking to Indonesia to import coal to Poland from Indonesia, which seems crazy by any standard. But I think yes. It depends. Where we're going with this, but it has the potential to impact Europe as a whole, I guess.
Absolutely. But Wayne, there's talk of the energy crisis, and that's an extremely serious issue, both for households, for industry, suppliers. But if we're saying, okay, the summer's going to be tough, and beyond the summer, how long is this energy crisis going to last?
You mean in terms of the price level,
or in terms of the duration? Are we out of the
this
woods?
Volatility?
Yeah, the volatility and these kind of very high prices and the threat of supply being cut.
I wouldn't say we're out of the woods. We're far from out of the woods, and I think this situation is going to long kick on into over the next few months. Fair enough, storage levels at the moment are higher than the 2018 levels. We've seen a slight recovery of storages, which gives you a bit more confidence. But again, if I revert back to these, looking at the time spreads, etc., you can see the backwardation in place, and you can see that the real risk is at the front end. While this conflict is continuing, I don't see gas prices moving anywhere too far down. I think this will underpin any downside potential, I think. But to be fair, where we are now are in levels of demand destruction. We know that already from around the 150s onwards. You've seen demand destruction in Europe in terms of large industrials. We've already seen the impact in the UK. We've been seeing that in the UK for a while now, and that will be increasing with prices now that are over 400 pence again on the MBP. So I think we will see. The volatility won't go away. I think that, like I said at the start or earlier, I think the only way we see prices sort of adjusting lower and maybe even back to where we were a few weeks ago, which was around the 90 to 100 mark, which is still high, of course. We need a cessation, need the hostilities to end, and then we need concrete, information regarding what's happening moving forward. Is Nord Stream 2 going to come back on? Is the certification process going to be reignited? That would ease market participants to some degree. But again, this all depends on a multitude of factors and what we're going through right now. And who knows how far this will go and where we'll be. Even in a week, what's going to happen over the weekend? What's going to happen in Kiev itself? There's so many questions unanswered that will give you a sort of window into, or a sort of viewpoint into what could happen over the summer. But we know the storages are not going to be at great levels. They're probably going to be, we've forecast them to be just above last year, just above the 2018 low when we had the beast from the east, etc. So we're not at the bottom of the 5-year range, we're just above it. Still need strong injections throughout the summer, but again, with the prices at levels, will Asian restocking demand once more start early? Will TTF still stay at elevated levels, which would force Asia prices higher, or force demand destruction there, or generation from other fuel types? There's so many uncertainties that I couldn't really. We're actually in the process of preparing our summer outlook, where we look at what's going to happen in terms of flows, price dynamics, etc., supply demand over 6 months. So you can imagine how fraught with risk that's going to be. So just to even think about the situation, really, you need to start keep an eye on this summer-winter spread, because that gives you an indication on the short term where the market sees the summer. And also, we keep harping on about it, but geopolitical concerns are driving everything. Look at the oil price today. Look at the price of coal that Laurie was talking about. Look at the price of other commodities. It's just a really, really crazy situation, and we're experiencing volatility and price levels like we've not seen before. Obviously, levels we saw in December, but the volatility actually. We'd never seen 110 pence move on the day ahead. 50%, I think the front month TTF went up in one day the other day. So it's unprecedented.
Begs the question of whether this is actually the end game, is in terms of, create, inflationary pressure in Europe, massive problems for the industry because of this energy crisis, begs the question. But I've also heard, so Europe faces, if the gas is cut off or if the flows stop, it faces some very tough choices.
Yes.
So, you mentioned starting nukes, maybe you cutting production.
Demand destruction, definitely in nukes. I think even Belgium were talking about extending they're not obviously a huge part of their, generation mix, but they were talking about extending some of the life of their nuclear as well. So there's a lot of people are now looking for alternative ways to wean off Russian gas.
And it's quite interesting that in the midst of this energy crisis, coal burning has had quite a rebirth, hasn't it, Laurie? And it's and people, I see in some messages, some environmental campaigns are saying it's better to burn coal in the short term rather than commit ourselves to long term to this gas from Russia.
Turnaround.
Yeah.
What a turnaround.
Yes, it could be, and certainly I'd imagine even if we're not talking about Russia, we're talking about other gas suppliers. They're going to be demanding probably longer term contracts and things of this sort, which will tie Europe into some more gas possibly. But yeah, certainly obviously the demand side is possibly one of the one things we could look to for to help if we do find ourselves very short of coal, if we find ourselves in that situation. But to what extent is Germany prepared to shut down some of its industry? Or it's a big question. Not something I'd like to be having to find a decision and an answer for.
No, absolutely. It's something for the politicians there. But do you see also increased interest, Wayne? Final question here coming up, by the way, for long-term contracts, for example, from the US, because there is a reluctance as well to sign them, given the EU green transition and the commitment to net zero. But if you're then locking yourself in, as Laurie said, to gas for the next 10, 15 years, I mean, seems kind of illogical.
Yeah. And again, just back to the coal thing, I was just having a quick look and just to see the coal switching. And if you look now, the actual coal switching is now, we don't foresee gas or TTF returning even to the top of the switching band until April 2023. So, which is, I haven't looked at it for a couple of days. It's quite remarkable, really.
Yeah, okay. But yet carbon is down massively at the same time.
Decoupled completely.
Yeah.
Carbon and gas completely decoupled. I think it's just tracking purely the financial markets. But sorry, back to your question.
But the long-term contracts with US LNG producers, is that something that's back on the table, or did it ever get off the table?
I don't think it ever got off the table. Perhaps there will be some more renewed interest now. And again, it depends on what road does Europe want to go down in terms of, like you mentioned, the energy transition. I read the other day they're talking about cutting from the latest 2030 target, cutting the reliance on gas by a further 23% due to what we've seen. But again, where does it come from? Ramping up renewables. They're talking about solar panels everywhere. We already know that renewables are intermittent, so that again is a risk. So they might see some additional longer term contracts, perhaps with the likes of Qatar, even when they do their expansion. We could see more exports to Northwest Europe coming from there, and they've signaled they'd like to help. I mean, Azerbaijani gas, maybe from another route, could also be a possibility. So there are a couple of possibilities, but again, nothing that's going to alleviate this short-term pressure that we're all under.
So all eyes on what's happening in the Ukraine. Obviously, our hearts go out to those affected. We will keep a very close eye on events going forward. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining the Montel Weekly Podcast.
You're welcome. Have a good day.
So listeners, you can now follow the podcast on our own Twitter account, aptly named the Montel Weekly Podcast. Please direct message any suggestions, questions, or, let us know if you think you have a good idea for a guest on the show. You can also send us an email to podcast@montelnews.com. Lastly, remember to keep up to date with all that's happening in energy markets on Montel News. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. Thank you and goodbye.